which NBA players should be very interested in coming to the Orlando Magic. The OrlandoMagicDaily.com just released a list of players that should be interested in joining the Orlando Magic, and which one of them is the best. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about whether or not any of them are a fit for the Orlando Magic and whether or not they would end up leaving their respective franchises. But first, guys, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel. It's the easiest and best way to support us over here at Magic Digest. We're trying to create an Orlando Magic basketball community here on YouTube, and we are in the dead period of the NBA's season or yearly calendar, if you will, and we're really trying to build it before the season gets underway. Now, let's get into this list, but first, before I reveal the top name on the list, I must say that this comes from Elaine Bloom. She wrote this, and it is a short list of some of the best players that have some ties. I've talked about each and every one of them on this list before in previous videos. It's really just kind of who should want to end up going to the Magic, because they're going to become a destination eventually, and she ends up going into great detail. Site editor and expert over at Orlando Magic Daily. So make sure that you guys go check that out. Okay, let's get into the very first player. It's going to be Trey Young. Trey Young obviously is a multi-time All-Star playing for the Atlanta Hawks, point guard. Not your traditional point guard, but he is a dynamic shooter, an amazing scorer, and a guy who's averaging double-digit assists and has averaged double-digit assists, I believe, for a handful of years in his career. Can you believe he's already I believe he's 25 years old now. He's been in the league. He's a veteran for a while now. It seems like just the other day he was at Oklahoma, but still, I digress. He is one of the players that probably would have been a better fit, and I could see him having come over to the Orlando Magic sooner if it wasn't just recently for the DeJounte Murray trade. But I am all ears when it comes to Trey Young, and that's because the Atlanta Hawks have not made it to the Eastern Conference Finals since the 2020-21 season, and that was, if you guys remember, the Ben Simmons meltdown that propelled them into that conference finals. They competed fairly well, but obviously just didn't have enough, and ever since they've been trying to claw their way back. They're trying to get Trey Young another superstar to fit with him, and they've actually kind of gone through a couple coaches since then too, so they really just are trying to figure it out. They've essentially blown it up kind of since that team. Trey Young is still obviously the core piece, but since they decided to trade DeJounte Murray, I don't know if they are going to be, saying goodbye to Trey Young anytime soon. But let's take a look at what he did last season in the NBA. Averaged 26 points per game, 11 assists per game, shot 37% from three. Now, the article does go into detail about how he is a great playmaker, and his talented scoring ability is going to be something that would fix a lot of the Orlando Magic's problems, but he's not a great defender. Also, peep that he is almost 26 years old, but he is not a great defender, and that is going to be something that really kind of checks, or gives a gut check to the Orlando Magic's team identity. Obviously, when you have so many great defenders, so many great and not very many great offensive players, you'll trade some of the great defenders for some great offensive players. But it is worth noting that Trey Young is obviously getting paid a lot of money, and the Orlando Magic would probably have to give up a lot more pieces indirectly, maybe even outside of making a trade. Like I'm saying, if he were to come in the offseason 2 years from now or 3 years from now, whenever his contract is up, you would have to regardless indirectly give up a lot of talent on the roster. Jalen Suggs, I don't think, could get paid. You'd have to give him up in the trade. You'd have to give up probably Cole Anthony. Wendell Carter Jr. is an expiring contract, but depending on when you were to get the deal done, you would have to give up a lot. Now, that's exactly why I don't know how feasible a trade or anything like that is in reality. But Trey Young, as far as him wanting to leave the Atlanta Hawks, I think could be very, very real. Now, they did just, like I said, decide that DeJounte Murray was not going to be on it, so they're on the roster. So they're going to continue on with Trey Young. Like, they just traded DeJounte Murray. So I'm not saying that they're going to trade Trey Young or anything in the offseason. But I think at a certain point, why, if you're Trey Young, you're looking at Orlando, you've had all these ties to the Magic. You got a superstar in Paolo Banchero that can also, be that heavy lifter. Plenty of great defensive players, plenty of great forwards, great size that can help support you. I think that that's something that he would be very interested in along the line, or a long way down the line, as the Atlanta Hawks continue to struggle to really find their footing. Also, would him and Mosley click? Who knows? There's too many questions as far as that is concerned right now. But when we take a look at the next player, it is going to be Darius Garland. Now, the article goes into mentioning kind of a very similar issue that would be had with getting Trey Young. Darius Garland is obviously not going to be cheap either, but at the same time, the Cleveland Cavaliers are full steam ahead with their current roster. They are reinvesting in what they had from last year, and they're essentially running it back. They re-signed everybody, extended everybody, and after they were essentially ready to blow it up a couple years ago, or even like last year, with the core of Donovan Mitchell, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Darius Garland, they are going on ahead. They're going to run it back at the very least for this next year, and I think that is something that is super interesting. And I think that just takes away from a lot of the possibilities of getting Darius Garland. But should he want to come? Well, I think he would probably get a much bigger role. He's averaging 18 points per game and 6.5 assists per game. So he's definitely more of that traditional point guard than Trey Young, but he definitely doesn't offer a ton more, a ton more offensively than Trey Young. He doesn't really come close to that level that Trey Young is offering. But obviously still very good from the three-point line. And Young, 24 years old, and is very efficient in a lot of the different three-point shooting categories when you take a deeper look, like the corner threes and the assisted threes and the 423 of all of his shots are threes. So very interesting when it comes to that when you take a deeper look into that. But he is an undersized, offensive-minded guard, and that is not exactly going to be the type of player that the Orlando Magic are going to like. So that's why I'm also skeptical of whether or not they would make a move or force a move like this. And I think if they're going to choose between Jalen Suggs and Darius Garland, I think they see Darius Garland as not really being able to take them over the hump. So they would probably end up opting to keep Jalen Suggs in that sort of scenario. I don't really see either of them, but I do very much agree that if the Cavs run it back, this is Donovan Mitchell's franchise. He has pretty much been able to call the shots over the last year or so, and I don't really see a scenario where Darius Garland ends up getting more love for the franchise or ends up really just taking another step within the Cleveland Cavaliers organization. That might have to be a change of scenery for him. So I do still see a reason for him to come to the Orlando Magic. But could they make it work? I don't think so, as it's currently constructed right now. Now, the next player, somebody I've talked about actually just in a recent video, has been Anthony Simons. Now, this is a player that is going to be at a different position than the other players that I mentioned. Certainly not as well known as some of the other players, and in my opinion, probably isn't as good, but is very, very cheap, considering, with all things considered and how much these NBA players are getting paid. Definitely somebody that I do think the Orlando Magic, not with the re-signing of, or the extension of Jalen Suggs, but prior to that, somebody that the Magic can afford. And I have heard what you guys said, that you don't really want to welcome in Anthony Simons, and I don't blame you, honestly, because he's been on the Portland Trailblazers team that hasn't been able to break through. But when people say that the Magic need an offensive-minded guard, Anthony Simons, his name has been thrown around a lot, averaging 23 points per game, 5.5 assists per game. Now, he's not really going to be that number one point guard. Probably that's going to fill the need of Paolo Banchero, what he said he would like, but definitely an option, and in my opinion, a lot more of a feasible option than some of the other guys that we have just mentioned. But those have been the top three guys that have been thrown around for months now. It feels like, over the last 5-6 months, those are the main names that you're hearing as far as that point guard position. But I think the Orlando Magic are going to stick with Jalen Suggs or anything like that. But should all of those three players want to come to the Magic, honestly, in my opinion, I think the Magic are in a currently better situation than at least the Hawks and the Trailblazers, so I don't see why they wouldn't want to slide. And then what about the Cavs? Well, I think that they would be, right? It was a very close series last year, so obviously that it remains to be seen how those teams will fare in the coming season. But guys, let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that those players should want to come to the Orlando Magic? And if you're a Hawks, Trailblazers, or Cleveland Cavaliers fan, let me know what you guys think as well in the comments below. But that's all the time I have for today. I will see you guys next time with more Orlando Magic basketball content.